Welcome to episode 165 of The Route. The Route is a glorified coffee chat in coffee form that takes you from A to B with a new guest every episode. As always, I'm your host, Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. Before we begin today's podcast, a couple things to cover as always. First, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast, follow the podcast, rate 5 stars. We're on all major platforms, Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify, and I believe 6 other audio. So check us out there. And then for YouTube, we're at the Routecast, or if you search the Route Podcast, you can follow us there. We have, short form clips, the full episodes, so you can check us out there as well. And then for social media, same type of thing, the Routecast. You'll see the magazine cover that gets released every episode, so you know a little bit about the episode that week. And then also some clips to go along with it, so you can maybe see what we're chatting about and see if it's an episode of interest. So check us out there at the Routecast, all platforms. Follow us, subscribe, rate 5 stars, all the good stuff, and it'll be much appreciated. And most importantly, forgot to mention, unlike maybe other podcasts, LinkedIn's maybe the platform that's a little more unique to us, just with what we're talking about, who we have going on. We're at the Routecast there if you want to, grow your network, start your network, maintain it, connect with myself, connect with the guests, connect with like-minded people, and we'll be good to go from there. But with that now said, we can get into today's guest. Today's guest is brought to you by Pickled. Pickled is a new social and sport option coming to those in the Ottawa area. If you're interested in learning more, sign up for their newsletter using the link in the episode description to stay up to date. With that, today's guest. So I'd now like to welcome not one but 2 guests today who are both Division I athletes previously and who have had stints in the NFL both on and off the field respectively. Since then, both embarked on their own careers in finance and, let's say, athlete representation as well, which leads us to where we are today, chatting with the founders of Vestible, CEO Parker Graham, and Head of Partnerships Yves Batoba. Welcome to The Route. How's it going, guys?
Chris, appreciate you having us on, man. It's going good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm not doing too bad. Thanks for coming on to both of you guys. And obviously a little bit different than most of our episodes here because we have both of you. But Yves, let's maybe start with your route and how you kind of started and end up meeting Parker. And then Parker, we can kind of do the same with you. And then we'll fill in the gaps from there.
Yeah, well, you mentioned playing D1 football. I didn't know anything about college sports. My family is a bunch of immigrants who came to this country not caring about sports really. So whenever I got to Oklahoma State, I had the same mindset that you would have in high school, where it's, you just try out for the team, you make the team, and boom, you play football. So that's what I thought it was, right? I walked on to the football team at Oklahoma State, was fortunate to make the team. I didn't know that you could actually get a scholarship to play collegiate football, and I ended up earning a scholarship years later. But did that, and then once you fall in love with the world of athletics and sports, you kind of just want to stay around it. You want to stick in it. So I went on to work for the University of Notre Dame after graduating from OK State. That led to me working with the Miami Dolphins. And working in the Miami Dolphins, I worked in this area called player engagement. So everything that I did in player engagement revolved around trust. So whether I was getting players to continue their education and graduate or pursue a master's degree, or getting them to attend a panel about mental health, the most important thing that I had was knowing that they could trust me and that I wanted them to reach their full potential, not just as athletes, but in life. So had a great experience doing that for the Miami Dolphins. After that, did a little bit of work in athlete representation, working for several different agencies. And I will say the number one topic discussed by athletes by far is finances, right? I think in 2024, the minimum rookie salary is $825,000. And you can mismanage a lot of that, especially for 21 years old, getting that money, living in Miami. So, we figured, hey, if you can maximize the short shelf life of you being a pro athlete, especially financially, then you're going to be all right. So then years later, with Parker, reconnecting with him, with Vestible now, we believe that we're giving athletes an opportunity and their fans a chance to benefit from that too, along with this journey, just simply by investing.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I guess, Parker, we can get into your route, and then Yves will fill in the gaps for you, and then we'll do the same with Parker after.
Yeah, absolutely. So very similar to Eve, grew up in a an environment where Eve grew up in Texas, or got to Texas eventually, and I grew up in a small Missouri town, about 9,000 people, that was pretty much a carbon copy of the movie Friday Night Lights. The whole entire town, that's all that was ever talked about was football. And so I grew up playing football from 8 years old all the way to high school, ran the same offensive system from 8 years old all the way till when I was 18. And really learned a lot about just, everything that you learn playing a sport at that level for so long. Was very fortunate enough to go play at Oklahoma State. I was a two-star nobody and got a scholarship, thankfully, because I probably wouldn't have gone to college without it. And just got there and excelled. I was very blessed to be at Oklahoma State, and Eve was as well, at a time where the program was really on the rise. And so we got to play in a lot of big-time games and win a lot of big-time games and really go through a lot of the ups and downs that big-time programs go through. In that time frame, I was very blessed to also just maximize my time as a student athlete. So ended up getting my master's and undergrad during my time at Oklahoma State, which was a huge blessing, and then ended up being fortunate enough to go play in the league. So went from college football to pro football. Had a short cup of coffee with the Baltimore Ravens, but really learned throughout that whole entire process, as Eve mentioned, that finances really drive so much of the ecosystems, not just at the pro level, but also at the college level and everything in between. And not only that, but the last 10 years, fandom and athletics has really changed. Athletes are more sophisticated. They truly are businesses the moment that they start playing at a high level. And I kind of got to witness that from within the locker room, and then transition from the locker room to the boardroom, if you will, right? So I went from hearing all my teammates and colleagues talking about wealth management to actually being in wealth management. So I actually went and got a job as a wealth manager at a $70 billion asset. Excuse me. Became a wealth manager at a $70 billion asset firm based in the Midwest, and started getting athletes as clientele and working with them in a brand new way before I started my first software company. Got inspired, was doing a lot of grunt work as the youngest advisor on the team. So I was doing all this analyst work for all of the older advisors who were out playing golf all the time. I was kind of the one that didn't get to go to the golf trips and had to stay inside and crunch numbers all day long. But what it did teach me was that there were a lot of really impressive people building a lot of really impressive companies using software. And so back in 2017, 2018, I got inspired to leave that kind of the cush life, if you will, that very cushy job in air conditioning, and ended up starting my own software company, which was a banking software company. So taking a lot of the things that I learned along the way and creating that company and trying to solve some problems for banks. But really this NFT and crypto craze struck roughly 2020, 2021, when we were all locked in our houses. And that was when I called up Eve, and we had a lot of conversations around this new world that we were kind of seeing form before our eyes, and how we wanted to really create something new and unite a lot of broken ecosystems together. Number one being athletes and how they're treated as companies. And number two, the fans who are really trying to partner with their athletes in ways that has never really happened before. So it's kind of soup to nuts where this whole thing kind of crescendoed into Eve and I getting back together and building this company together.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. I appreciate both you guys sharing those routes so far to date. And I guess what I typically like to do with the route is kind of maybe go back to the beginning, and then we'll work our way to where we are now. And maybe we'll keep the same format of I'll ask a question, we'll have Parker or Eve go first, and then we'll go to Parker. And I think both of you kind of touched on, growing up to an extent and then getting to, college, university, right?
Yeah.
Did you guys ever have any doubts in regards to what you're going to do in life, right? I think, Parker, you're mentioning you're in the same offensive system from a young age, so maybe your route always kind of seemed to be football. But Eve, I think you're a little bit more saying about how when you went to school, you didn't know you could maybe earn a scholarship, right? I think is what you're touching on. So
Right.
It sounds like maybe your route or your mindset wasn't always, football was the end all be all, right? So maybe if you wanted to touch on that, like where was your mindset as a kid, right? Was it always football? Was it business? Was it tech? I'm curious about that.
Nah, Chris, I'll tell you what, whenever you go into, just as a teenager and then going into college, whenever you're playing football and you have some really talented teammates like a Justin Blackman or a Des Bryant or a Brandon Whedon. Like, we were surrounded by a bunch of really, really talented guys. And the thing about that is they bring the best out of you. So as you're practicing with them, right, as you're sharpening one another out there on that practice field, I think the mindset is always, oh, I'm going to take this to the highest level that I possibly can. So that was the mindset, man. I'm going into this thing, Chris, thinking to myself, oh, yeah, we're making it to the league. And then very quickly, I realized, I'm just not at the same level as the rest of these guys, you know. So they go on and they keep on getting better. I'm like, I feel like I've reached my ceiling. Why is it that I can't get any better at this thing? So, although you're still giving it your all in the locker room and out there on the field, I started thinking to myself, hey, let me make sure that I have some plans, just in case this thing doesn't work out. So I ended up getting really, really involved with the NCAA. In fact, I served on a couple different committees. One was called the Minorities, Opportunities, and Interest Committee. Another one was called Division I Student Athlete Advisory Committee. So I was the rep of the Big 12 Conference for all Division I conferences. So as a senior in college, I was flying out to Indianapolis on a monthly basis and having meetings about legislative autonomy. And we were talking with other student athletes across the country. And they would fly me to Indy. They would fly me to different panels out in San Diego. I would go out to Orlando to speak on things. So it was a really, really cool experience being that involved while I was still playing football, right? While I was still a student athlete. So as I was doing that, my mind just got opened up a lot more to the business of sports. And that's where my passion grew for that, right? So I got really, really excited about the business of sports. And one of the things that I was always drawn to was how, man, these athletes are down here and they're putting in a whole bunch of work. They're putting the blood, the sweat, and the tears in. And I'll never forget hearing somebody say, look, football is going to make a whole bunch of millionaires, and the majority of them are not going to be on the field. And that just always stuck with me, right? You have the partnerships, you have the people who are in the suites, you have all these different businesses, you have these coaches, everybody that's kind of involved in this, while the athletes are the ones that are generating this athletic economy. But it's almost as if everybody else is benefiting even more from it. So I always remember that, and I said, hey, let me make sure that I'm always empowering athletes. And then later on in life, becoming a fan of the game, I thought to myself, hey, there's a way that we can actually empower athletes and empower fans as well, as we started building Vestible. But that was the journey. The mindset was, hey, we're going football all the way, pivoted to sports business, and here we are now building this tech company.
Yeah, kind of parlaying off of that. It's interesting. Like I mentioned, I grew up in this town where there's 9,000 people and 10,000 show up for a football game on Friday. Like it's just a weird deal. There's two like when you graduate, there's like 2 manufacturing plants that you go work at amongst a myriad of just small businesses, and there's just not a whole lot of escape velocity from where I'm from, right? And so for me, I'm telling you, I'm talking 9 years old, 10 years old, all I could think about was getting the heck out of Southwest Missouri. That's all I cared about. Didn't care where it was, didn't care how it was. And so I just obsessed over really academics first. I was an okay athlete. My brother, I was kind of in the shadow of my older brother. He was 10 years older than me and was a phenom freak of an athlete. And so I just was always, Stephen Brigham's little brother. And when you're in that spot, you just you do what you're good at. And I was always good at school. So I kind of was going to go down the route of, trying to figure out how to be an engineer, trying to figure out how to be an architect, really, really good with my hands and really good with my brain. And it wasn't until I kind of grew into this 6'7", 300-pound body that I had at the time that I really figured out that, oh, wow, like I could probably do college sports. I was doing AAU basketball as a freshman. I was doing, I was playing JV like as a sophomore in high school or a freshman in high school, sophomore in high school. And I wasn't very good. And you could ask any of my friends growing up, like I was the last guy that they would have thought was going to go and turn pro. But what I did have was a God-given ability to just bust my ass. I don't know if we're able to cuss on this podcast, but that's really what it is. Like I just had a very high work ethic and a very high pain tolerance. And in all honesty, I still do. And what that allowed me to do was I just outworked everyone that I saw. If you were trying to work harder than me, I would work harder than you. And again, I had that pain tolerance that I was willing to die for something, and most folks just aren't willing to do that. And so what that allowed me to do was, as Yves mentioned, kind of iron sharpens iron. At your high school, you're the top dog, and then you're the top dog, and you're really the top. Like I was probably one of the top 4, players that year in the state from a college perspective, right? I was 6'7", 250, and I was going to be able to go play ball. I go to Oklahoma State, and I'm very humbled very quickly. You can go down there, and as Yves mentioned, I mean, we had some freaks on that team. We had and I played offensive line, so we had Russell Okung. We had Andrew Lewis, who was a 4-year starter. Russell was a top 10 pick. You had Barry Bond, who was a 4-year starter. You had Lane Taylor, who was a 4-year starter, went and played for the Green Bay Packers for 8 years. Like, you had just a lot of these really talented guys. And I quickly realized that, number one, I am not ready, but number two, I can play at this level. And so football really became everything. School was very easy. So like I kind of didn't really have to try very hard, which was a blessing. And so I poured everything into becoming the best athlete that I could. It ended up being a 4-year starter, which was awesome. Redshirted my first year. And really kind of, as Yves kind of mentioned, like max myself out from a football perspective. And even going into my senior year, I knew I could probably play in the league, but I also knew in the back of my mind, like, hey, not going to be a top 10 pick, not going to be a maybe even drafted guy. Ended up not getting drafted. And so I had that preconceived notion of like, all right, let's make sure the studies are right. And so I got my master's while I was there, right? Huge benefit. Very thankful for Oklahoma State for helping me get that under scholarship. And once I got to the league, I very quickly realized like, oh, wow, this is another level. I might be 6'7", I might be 300 pounds, but a lot of these other guys are 6'7", 300 pounds and look way different than I do. There was guys that were 315, had abs, like 6-packs, 8-packs. And I was just like, yeah, okay. I promised myself I was going to try my hardest that I possibly could. I ended up being the 54th guy on a 53-man roster. So that's as close as you can get to making the team without making the team. And from there, I basically just tried to figure out what was next, and felt good about what I had done in the league, but business was calling. And I remember very distinctly, and Yves even mentioned this, sitting in those locker rooms and hearing guys talking about their finances and thinking to myself, and honestly being a financial advisor to those guys in those conversations, because I had done wealth management type stuff when I was in college. And so I was already kind of giving away that knowledge and trying to help guys miss hurdles that I could just see them making plainly right there in front of me. Now, they might have had $40 million and I had no $1 million, right? But I could still help in that aspect. And so when I ended up leaving and going and becoming a wealth advisor, I became a high net worth wealth advisor. So I was helping not athletes as much. I still had some athletes as clients, but ended up helping a lot of old oil and gas, legacy type of money, type of wealth in the Midwest, in Oklahoma, Texas, and some of the Great Plains states. And it all literally stemmed from the fact that, number one, I knew I wasn't going to be cut for the NFL for very long, and also knew that, man, this is really cool. Like helping people, really create, a new world for themselves was really, really interesting to me. And it's weird that, I went from that to then software development to then creating this company with Yves, which is really a unique mixture of all of my interests, right? Sports, finance, and really just helping people, right? Creating these new things, creating these new worlds. So it's a really full circle moment.
What's so funny is I remember Parker hitting me up one day. He just called me and he goes, "Hey, I'm watching NBC right now. Were you just on NBC? Like, did I just see you on there?" Because we had just created this program with the team owner, Stephen Ross, at the time, where we allowed athletes to really get a behind the scenes look of big commercial real estate projects. So NBC was one of the people that covered us. And then from that conversation, Parker and I just kind of stayed in touch. And we just always kept in communications about different ideas and things that we may want to do together in the future. And, eventually 2020, 2021, this idea for Vestible came about.
Yeah, and I guess before we get into that moment, because I do want to dive into that later, I find one of the unique things that you both kind of touched on there was almost that like fork in the road, right? And I think that's something from 165 podcasts I've done. It seems like almost every guest has hit that fork in the road, regardless of what type of discipline they're in, right? Whether it's athletics, banking, whatever you want. Like either some people hit in the first year of university where, someone like myself, I was in accounting initially, and I was like, hey, I can't just sit in a cubicle and excel the rest of my life. Like I need to build something, right? And then other people have the same type of thing, right? Where I think that's pretty cool to have the perspectives that, both of you guys competing at a high level for, sports saw that, the foresight to be like, hey, like, I don't know if this is going to be my end goal, right? So what can I start doing from there? So I kind of want to dive into that a bit because I know I've had guests on who, they're the COO of a sports betting company and they thought they were going to be a lawyer. Then they went on a trip and then they started in daily fantasy sports. So I was kind of curious, was it a gradual progression where you guys realized, hey, like, this isn't going to be for me? Or was it just like a quick moment where you're like, hey, it's time to start pivoting?
I will say, man, there was so the NFL community is pretty small. Everybody just kind of knows each other. Once you're in and your family. And I remember one of my counterparts at the Raiders and another one of my counterparts at the Ravens, actually, had just been let go, right? So both of them, same year, got let go.
Shout out Harry Swain.
Yeah, Harry Swain, right, being one of them. And I remember getting on the phone with them and just having a conversation. It was Harry Swain and Lamont Winston, and we're talking about, the experience. And by the way, there were probably two of the highest regarded people in those roles, like really, really respected and really, really good at what they did. OGs in the game of player development in the NFL. And after talking to them, I'm just like, man, it could be as easy as just, hey, new coach is coming in or new GM is coming in or whoever says, hey, I want to bring my guy in and boom, you're replaceable. Just like that. And I remember just thinking to myself, oh man, there's got to be a way to make yourself more valuable, whether it's here within the team or outside of a team. And I think that really was when my mind started to shift about becoming more and more useful and developing more skill sets, especially in the grand scope of business. But I will say, like, my biggest, if I could call it superpower, wasn't just the knowledge that I had in the business of sports, but I will say it's cultivating relationships and trust with the individuals, in that space. So whether that's the athletes, the agents, the folks at the union, the folks at the league office, in the team or across teams, that's the thing that I care about the most is that sense of empathy, but also relationship building, just something that I really, really value. So I knew that no matter what I did, I didn't want it to be as transactional as much as I wanted it to be as relational and as transformational as we possibly could.
Yeah, very, very similar to Eve. I mean, my fork in the road was just as abrupt, or I wouldn't even say abrupt, but just as kind of like eye-opening. I was a wealth advisor, and this is 2017, early 2017, and I remember this plain as day. We had like robo-advisors that had become a thing, right? Like, the not Robinhood, but more like the Betterments, the Wealth Fronts, Personal Capital, Capital with a Q is one I always remember. And they were very successful, just uber successful, very slick interfaces. And I was in this industry that was always suit and tie, suited and booted, steak dinners and golf and convincing these wealthy individuals to work with you. And the only reason that they would is that they like you, and just being an absolute just hound at networking and just getting your name out there. And what was really interesting was in the office that I was in, I was the sixth man in what was a five-man group. There was a group of three at the very top. There was a group of two in the middle, and then me. And I was 23 at the time, and I just vividly remember not necessarily pissing people off that I was in the role that I was in, but definitely there was a lot of people wanting me to earn my stripes and really giving me a lot of work to just bide my time basically to earn those stripes. And I remember sitting in this room. There's a group, like I mentioned, the group of three was like in their mid 50s, the early 60s. The group of two was like mid 30s to early 40s. And then me. So the next closest advisor is 15 years older than me. So I'm looking at my life basically, right? Like I'm looking at the different stages of life just sitting in this room. I got the 30s, I got the 40s, I got the 50s and the 60s. And those folks that were in those roles had done those jobs for 30 years, 40 years, and had put the time, effort, and energy to have a very good life for themselves. You're talking about guys making $700,000 a year as wealth advisors, like very, very good money. And for a poor broke kid from middle of nowhere, Missouri, like that was life changing in so many more ways than one. And I was making very good money as a 23-year-old, right? Like I was very, very fortunate. And I remember this group coming in, talking about, we had a presentation on robo-advisors and how it was going to change the industry or how it wasn't going to change the industry. And at the end of it, the consultant gets done. And he's basically like, this isn't going to change anything. You guys are always going to be around. This industry is going to be the exact same. It's been the same for the last 20 years. It's going to be the exact same for the next 20 years. This is really going to affect this group of the market. It's not going to affect this group of the market. And I'm sitting there looking at this, and I'm looking at the room, and everybody's shaking their head yes. And I'm like, y'all are insane. Like, this is the first step in a lot of steps where our industry is going to be changed forever. And it's since that day, it's still getting worse and worse and worse for those individuals, because it's hard to compete when you're a wealth advisor and an AI can do your job for you from a tactical perspective. And now you're just relying on your friends to like you. And just as Yves mentioned, everyone's replaceable. And the next 30 years of wealth advising are not going to look like the previous 30 years. And I saw that right then and there. And so I had a fork in the road for myself of, do I really want to like spend my life just kind of working in an industry that's just going to dissolve? Or do I want to go build something that's going to create the new future? It's going to create the future that I want to see, right? And that was really the fork in the road right then and there. So it was, it took a lot of time. I actually spent a year kind of studying how to be an entrepreneur, studying how to build a business, studying how to build software. I don't build software, but like convincing people to want to build software for you and how to do all those things. And about a year later from that conversation, from that meeting, is when I left the institution and went off on my own. I went from making a very nice salary to making a no salary. I actually went through a divorce at that time. It just was a very big, life-changing event that all started with that little seed of, and what I feel like God showing me, these are the paths that you have in front of you. Which one are you going to take? And I thank God every single freaking day that I'm not still at the bank and not still wearing a suit every day. This is the outfit that I wear most days now. And it's a lot better and a lot more freedom, even though it is a very difficult life that even I do live, trying to build something that's never existed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess building on that too, right? I think you guys both kind of, let's say, touched on the steps you guys took once you hit that fork in the road, right? Maybe you decided to go left rather than right, and then you kind of, go along that path. But I think, Yves, you touched on that NBC moment, right? And I think you were working with the Dolphins at the time, correct?
Yeah.
How did that moment like build up to where you guys maybe started getting in contact again, and then that's where maybe that seed of Vestible started to flourish a bit, right? Where maybe that first conversation led to another one. But I want to hear more so about how that what it looked like prior to that NBC moment. Like, how did you get to the Miami Dolphins, right? I know you were at Oklahoma State. How did that transfer over from there? And then how did you guys reconvene again?
It's honestly a huge reason why I just am so gung-ho about relationships. Whenever I was at Oklahoma State, it was all just, hey, I'm serving on these different committees. I get to speak at these different places. I'm getting to meet a lot of really dope people, but I don't really know what that's going to lead to. So it took somebody vouching for me, right? Ed Stewart, who was the deputy commissioner at the Big 12 conference at the time, made a phone call to somebody at Notre Dame. And he was like, hey, I know that you guys are trying to bring somebody into your student athlete wellness and development area. Well, I know somebody who's graduating. You should probably give him a call. Senior Associate AD Mike Harity gives me a call from Notre Dame. He says, hey, Ed Stewart said these great things about you. Would you be interested in this role? So I'm like, well, yeah, I wasn't even thinking about Notre Dame. I don't think I even knew what state Notre Dame was in, to be honest with you. But everybody knows Notre Dame, right? The brand. So, in a span of, I think, 6 days, Mike calls me and offers me the job a few days later. And boom, that's how it starts. Like on my birthday, right? July 14th was my first day starting at Notre Dame. A year later, right? You talk about on my birthday again, I get offered a job for the Miami Dolphins. And the reason that came about was because Caleb Thornhill down at the Dolphins called up Mike Harity. And he said, man, I'm hearing about what you guys are doing in the community for your student athletes in terms of development. Man, where'd all this come from? And Mike vouched for me. He said, well, we brought in this guy named Yves. He's been doing this, and that. And Caleb was going to be at Michigan State, which is his alma mater. And he hits me up and he was like, hey, do you think that you could prepare a presentation for our student athletes, just about whatever you want it to be about? Just prepare a presentation. I'm going to be speaking to some of the summer student athletes that are there on campus. I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? So I'm excited about it. I want to, prove myself. And I put this presentation together. I drive up 3.5 hours to go to East Lansing, Michigan. I'm there. I meet Caleb. And I'm like, okay, where do you want me to set up? Do we have to put the projector over here or whatever? He goes, oh, don't worry about it, man. Just go ahead and take a seat. I'm like, man, whose man is this, man? Why would he have me create a presentation and just tell me to, not create one or not give it anyway? So I'm there sitting, and he has this presentation called How to Land Your Dream Job. And he goes through this entire thing with the student athletes. In the middle of the presentation, he points at me. He says, hey, you see that guy right there? I just wanted to see how bad he wanted this. If he had it in him, if he would drive up on his birthday. He didn't even know it was my birthday until I told him that day. And then that's why he's coming back to Florida with me to work in player engagement. And that's how he announced it. Right? I'm like, oh, snap. I guess I'm going down there. Right. But it took somebody vouching for me. And I'm just a big believer in if you do good work where you're at, where God has you planted, other people will feel comfortable actually vouching for you. Right. One of my favorite scriptures says, many are the plans of a man, but it is the Lord that directs their steps. I had all these different plans of where I thought my life was going to go. But then, every time I thought I was going to do something, I get a little knock. And it's like, no, actually, God is saying move over here instead. So while I was at the Miami Dolphins, there's a guy by the name of Dan Marino, Hall of Fame quarterback. Some of your followers may have heard of him, but he was like, hey, I want to connect you with my agent. I think that you could do good work in his agency, right? It was called Neostar. And that's how he connected me to a guy named Ralph Stringer. Again, it's always just been people reaching out and vouching for me. And that's been the story of my life. Like, these opportunities have come simply from, other people looking out. So I want to be that for other people. And I'm just a big believer in, hey, whenever God has you planted somewhere, do a really good job with what you have in your hand, and he's going to open up the doors for you. So I don't even know if I answered your question. I just came on this thing, but that's how it worked out.
No, you definitely did. I think you filled in some gaps of how that came to be. And I think from there we can kind of start looking at how maybe Vestible kind of came to be, right? I think you kind of filled the gap, and I think we're both at the same place for where Parker just answered too. And I guess from there, right, you got to the Dolphins. Obviously, I think you mentioned one of the projects that then maybe caught the eye of Parker on NBC, right? And then you guys started having these conversations, I think you mentioned, right? When you first started chatting again, obviously you're reconnecting, you're catching up, etc. But when did these discussions start, coming up for both of you of, hey, like, there's this problem that we should solve? Was it always that's the problem you're going to solve, or was it first maybe, I don't know, merchandise or, athlete representation as a whole, or was it always maybe going to be down the lane of, Vestible?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, Chris, Vestible's not the first idea I've thrown over the wall over to Eve, and it's not necessarily. It's really interesting. I think when you look back at your life, and this is for anybody, right? Like you definitely see the people. If you look back 5 years, 10 years even, you can see the people in your life that really ascended to a different level, right? They took what God gave them and they maximized it, right? Whether it's on the field, off the field, in business, in whatever it might be. And Eve is just always one of those people who, out of our teammates, is just one guy who always ascended to the highest level of what he could do, right? And that always stuck with me. There are very few people that understand what it's like to be a college athlete and to go through that. And so when that happens, that person went through what you went through, right? Like all the 2-days and all the workouts and all that stuff, like we are cut from the same cloth because of that experience that we went through together. And so when I saw him doing that, I reached out probably just to really just ideate on different things. Just like, hey man, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Some of the stuff I was doing was, athlete finance related. I knew he knew so many athletes, and I just was asking him questions like, what do you think about this? And then there was another one that was more focused at college. I knew he knew people in that space as well. And then I finally, again, kind of bringing it back full circle, this stuff was happening in crypto and in NFTs. This is, think about 2020 when we were all locked in our cages for the year. And people just had all this disposable income because of the checks we were getting, right? And so many people went into these different markets. There was a ton of movement in the cards market. Memorabilia came back crazy strong during that time. NFTs exploded. You had Bored Ape Yacht Club everywhere. You had all these ICOs, these initial coin offerings happening. You had pump and dump schemes happening. You had FTX, you had Binance, all this stuff happened in a very, very quick time frame.
Yeah.
And I just remember, really just sitting down and trying to think about, man, there's something here. I read an article about Nas. Nas is one of my favorite hip hop artists, and he did a deal with I can't remember the name of the company, where he was selling royalties in his new album that he was dropping. So anybody who had shares in this album on this exchange, I think it was a blockchain exchange, maybe Solana. If you had access to that, you'd then get royalties off of Spotify and off all the hits and all the album sales. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And then there was this company called BitClout that came out. And BitClout was an offshoot of an exchange, an offshoot of a crypto exchange. And they basically took all of the Twitter influencers that were on Twitter, and they created stocks that represent that group's name, image, and likeness, their brand. And then they sold shares in those people to people on this exchange, completely illegally, like illegal as all get out. They had the Kardashians, they had all these names, these celebrities. And their whole thing was we'll do it now, and then the celebrities can come later and like accept their money. We have all this money sitting in these wallets for them on our exchange, and they can come accept it. It was very, very controversial at the time, very controversial. But that was immediately when the light bulb went on, like, oh snap, there's something right there. And that was really when I called Yves, and I'm sure he's got and we remember different parts of it. So Yves probably has some other things to fill the gaps. I'm a very big picture thinker, not a detail oriented person. But I do vividly remember calling Yves and basically saying, like, dude, I've got this wild thing that I'm seeing. If there is an opportunity for us to unite our superpowers, this is the one. And I think we had probably 3 conversations in 3 nights. It was very, very rapid, and it became an obsession from there.
Yeah, he hit me up. I remember it was July 19th, right? He hits me up. We get on the phone. I talk to my wife. I'm like, yo, I'm hyped. Listen to what Parker just told me over the phone. We get on the phone again the next day and then the day after that. And I was like, hey, let me go check out this song by Nas. And it was Rare on his King's Disease 2 album. And I remember thinking to myself, yo, I've been listening to this song on repeat for the past month. So I was like, I'm actually going to buy into this. And then I never got anything from it. I'm like, what did this actually turn into? I'm like, but everybody did this. So there's something there, but there's got to be a way to do this better. So
yeah, and we very quickly realized that there was this something was happening, right? And you see it with AI right now, right? Like everybody knows something's happening, but it's really hard to figure out like where to stake your claim and really how to take it and do something valuable with it. And so we're in the middle of this movement happening, right, in the world, not just in our ecosystem, but the world. And there's also this thing in fandom where people have always said, man, if you just would have had stock in that player back in 1983, what would that stock be worth today? We've all said that. And we've all said that person's stock is going up, that person's stock is going down. And so we then just kind of set off on this odyssey to figure out, like, number one, could you create something that's legal, that's like regulated by the government, by the SEC and FINRA? Could you do that? And if you did, would athletes want it? And if you could, would fans want it? And that was really the genesis and the founding story of what is now Vestible and what came to be. You asked a little bit ago, like, was it always Vestible? Was it always that theory? And 100% it was. I mean, we even I were in 2 spots in our life at that point. I mean, I had a software startup, right? Like I had done kind of what I set out to do with that first company. Yves was at the Dolphins at the time, was transitioning away from that to becoming
I thought I was going to be an agent. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's almost like, God opened this door for both of us to walk through together, and it was up to us to be obedient or not. And we just so happen to be kind of crazy, a little bit. We've got, a couple screws loose maybe. And we walked through it. And it was never, about, it's kind of one of the best parts about it is like, it was never about like, oh man, this is $1 billion idea. We need to build it. It was much more so like, man, could we be the ones that could figure this problem out? Yeah. Like if we could be the ones to figure that out, not only are you affecting the athletes, the fans, but you're theoretically affecting everyone in sports. Like if you could imagine for a second on the ESPN ticker on the bottom of the screen, there being a stock chart every day like there is on MSNBC where I saw Yves that one time, right? Like could you do that? And that's really why I think we continue to strive to do it every single day, because that's what I want to see. I want to see if that is possible personally.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think that gets us perfectly to the point of, let's say someone's tuning in and they're like, hey, like I've heard how it kind of came to be. What is Vestible for someone tuning in now, right? I think you kind of dropped some things where people are starting to piece it together. But if someone were to come and ask you guys directly, how would you explain it? And maybe you can kind of take us on from there of what it's about and what you're trying to do from there as well.
Yes. So Vestible is one of the first federally regulated investment platforms that allows individuals to invest in the careers of their favorite athletes, and not just investing like using the word, but like actually investing in their career at a certain point in their career. We typically work with athletes who are, outperforming their current contracts, not yet have really made their big payday yet. And so you're really taking a chance on these athletes that you think have the ability to be the next Pat Mahomes, the next Travis Kelce, insert your favorite athlete there, right? And we do it by allowing them to invest in the actual brand of the athlete. So when an athlete signs with us, we take that document that they sign, and basically that document at that point in time now owns a certain percentage of their on-the-field income. And so as we do our offering and we sell shares in that asset that we then securitize, every time the athlete gets paid, as the athlete goes on their career and they get paid, they're paying their investors back that certain percentage. So just like how a dividend gets paid from a stock for all of its shareholders, our athletes pay a distribution to all their shareholders every single time they get paid throughout their career. So if you have an athlete who's a rookie, you invest in that rookie, you invest in that asset right then and there, you get to ride that ride literally right alongside them. You put your money where your mouth is, and they're able to then pay those investors back and then join in that journey together throughout that career, versus how it kind of happens today, which is really just marketing. You actually mentioned merchandising. Like that's really what it is right now. Athletes are just used in so many different forms and fashions. It's about time to kind of fix that pain point. Did I miss anything there?
I was just going to add, on the fan side, you always say, his stock is going up, her stock is going up. And then on the athlete side, from the time you get good, you hear for the rest of your life, hey, you're a business, act like a business, conduct yourself as a business. And we as Celestia just said, all right, well, let's bring these things together and let's actually create a business out of this, right? So, athletes and their careers being the businesses, fans being the investors, both sides get to benefit off of it, because whenever the athlete actually hits that initial offering, boom, they keep 80% of the proceeds, and then you have all these, 20% of the proceeds goes into that agreement, that brand that is filed. And the cool thing about that is, one, you're getting that 1% of the distribution from the athlete too. But also, there's also this cool element of, oh, here's his proof point. Way before so-and-so athlete popped and you knew his name, I bought shares in this person's career, and I can prove it right here, way back when. So that's a really, really cool element for the fan as well.
Yeah, and we're actually in the middle of our first offering right now, Chris. So our first athlete, we're on the app stores. We're slowly rolling out his investors and raising the capital for him right now. We've got a ton behind him. So that's currently where we're kind of right there at the starting line, if you will, for this new world we want to create.
Are you able to share what athlete it is at the moment?
Oh yeah. There's tons of publications around us.
Yeah.
You want to go for it?
Yeah, Baron Browning, who's an outside linebacker for the Denver Broncos right now, right? You take a look at the perfect caricature. It was a guy who, coming out of college, any deep fan of Baron Browning knows, hey, if he gets in the right system and if they use him the right way, he could be a guy who's one of the best in his position in the entire league. And you've seen whenever he's used the right way, right, depending on what defense he was under, Vic Fangio or Vance Joseph, whenever he's used the right way, he truly is one of the best at his position. So now here he is going into a contract season, and we know that if and when he pops, boom, he could, 10x his income, 18x his income, 20x his income, right? So now you're looking at that and you're like, oh, wow, this could be an incredible investment opportunity just as an investor. So, you're looking at the perfect athlete, like the perfect candidate for something like this. And, after Baron goes through it, then we have a bunch more athletes who are coming along right after him as well.
Yeah, and I guess one of the questions I have on that too, before we get into what you guys do, then we can start wrapping up the podcast. Is that something where you guys are almost looking into the future a little bit, are you guys going to have like your own, let's say, scouting department, right? Because obviously if you want to find that, diamond in the rough, let's say, or someone that's going to pop off, as you're mentioning, that could be a good investment. Is that something where you guys, I'm assuming football with your backgrounds is where you're going to start, but is that something maybe with time, I don't know, someone in water polo, like you'll have scouts in all these different disciplines, right? And you'll kind of get into it a bit further from there. I don't know if that's
Chris,
yeah.
if we've got scouts in water polo, our company was very successful. Let's just put it that way. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I truly think that our biggest, advantage as founders of this company is that we know football really well, and football is a very powerful sport in this country. We've got employees that work on the basketball side. We're going to hire some for soccer and for baseball as well. So you'll see those ecosystems definitely grow for us. But when it comes to both college and pro for all of those sports, you do need to have a team that has expertise in each one. So that's kind of where we're starting with football and basketball to get our initial offerings done, and then who knows, man, we might have some athletes in La Liga, if I could talk, La Liga and the English Premier League by next year. So it's just kind of going where the fans want us to go and going where the athletes have the most need. If that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Water polo is a random example, but I can definitely see where you guys are going with that. It sounds very exciting. Hopefully, I could invest in a water polo athlete one day. I don't know anything about it, but that means you guys are doing well. And I guess before we begin to wrap up the podcast, obviously you guys are in this together. You guys work together closely. But if someone, let's say, wants to shadow each of you, right, for a day or for a week, maybe do you mind sharing what a typical day looks like, what your role entails, and what does it look like to be a CEO, head of partnerships, and what kind of things do you come to your desk?
Yeah. I mean, typical day. I don't think any day is typical, to be honest with you, because there's so many elements right now. I think that whenever you're running a startup, you're kind of doing everything, right? We have a staff right now. We're going to be hiring more soon. But, I think in the beginning phases, as we're in right now, it's really a matter of identifying. I think for me, as head of partnerships, you mentioned like, hey, you guys could be scouts or partner with scouting departments in the future. Well, right now it's actually leaning a lot on different folks who are already doing that type of work, right? So there are a lot of different companies that exist in this world, whether it's the PFFs of the world, or if it's, hey, let me call the director of scouting at this NFC North team and see his thoughts on this player, or here's somebody that manages salary caps at the NFL office. How does this team typically look at these types of contracts? So like these things are really cool when you not only know the sport, but people that really work in the sport or are intertwined with these teams. I think that goes a long way. But whether that's conversations with the athletes themselves, conversations with the agents, conversations with the teams. Right now it's a lot of conversations, but I don't think anything actually replaces going to where people are at, meeting with them in person, at different events, different conferences. And the cool thing about what we've been able to build so far is that so many people believe in it. And because so many people believe in it, people have been able to say, hey, we want to invest into your company as well, right? So we've been able to, raise a ton of money and to get us to where we're at so far. So it's cool just to see, a bunch of people that believe in it. But if somebody wanted to shadow us, every day might look a little differently, although we control what we can control. Parker and I probably talk to each other more than we talk to our significant others, right? Than we talk to our spouses. And then, we're meeting with our teams on the tech side, our teams on the marketing side, our team, all over the place, the sales side. So, kind of a lot of that right now and a lot of long hours.
Yeah. From a CEO perspective, and I think you mentioned you've had lots of CEOs and C-suite people on your pod before. I would say, what I do on a daily basis is very similar to what Yves mentioned. It just changes a lot. So right now, and not only does it change, but the cycles just kind of come and go, right? So like right now we're in a fundraising cycle, so I'm doing a lot of fundraising. The second part of that is that we're in a tech build cycle, so I'm building a lot of the, not building the tech, but I'm kind of the head of product right now. So all of the product ideas are really starting in my brain, and then I have to get them out to the tech team to kind of be able to build and craft and brainstorm with me on. So those are the two big ones. And then on top of that, we've got all the marketing stuff that we do. We have an amazing marketing team. We are so blessed to have a lot of really creative people on our staff. And so that takes a huge amount of the burden off of what we do. But more often than not, I would say I'm probably the chief bottleneck officer is probably the best way to describe what I do right now. I just there's because we are a startup and because we're heavily regulated. There's just a lot of stuff that like I have to have last say on, and typically that does come at a cost sometimes because we have to wear so many hats. It just is the nature of the beast right now, and it's weirdly addicting, to be honest with you. Like I love wearing all of the hats, and it's not good for you. So it's a weird like kind of fine line that we have to walk. And there's a lot of trust in it too. I mean, we've hired incredible people, and we have to just continue to get better at just giving them the things that they can do and control, so we don't have to worry about it. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with us. So it's every day is a unique balance of putting out fires, letting some fires continue, and then figuring out which ones we need to focus on for the day.
No, I appreciate you guys sharing that. Very interesting what both you guys have on your plates. And yeah, Yves, one of the things quickly before I get to the last wrap-up question, I was curious, is that something maybe in the future or even something you're looking at now, like the potential to invest in the marketability of an athlete, right? Because sometimes usually good athletes, they're the more marketable ones. But being, Canada, sometimes we see fighters who, make pennies on their contracts. They have this huge brand off the field just because they're very relatable. Is that something that maybe with time too, where people can be like, hey, like this guy's going to be huge post-career or something like that too?
Oh yeah, no, that is certainly on the table, right?
Oh,
Right
nice.
now, you're talking about investing essentially in, what they make in their sport. But as you mentioned, fighters are people who their marketability surpasses what they make in their sport, and even women athletes, right? You
Yep.
take a look at what the women right now are doing in March Madness, and in March Madness, these women are outpacing the men, and they're getting the national deals. And Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, no matter where they get drafted to, they're going to take all these national marketing deals with them, and add on top of that a basketball salary, right? So we want to find the right way to actually monetize and capitalize off of that for the athletes, for the fans. So that is definitely on the table right now.
Yeah, very cool. And then to wrap up the podcast, I think we've done a great job of going to where you guys started to where we are today. So with that, 165 episodes, I've said it 165 times. I'm going to live until I'm 103. I'm going to be on a rocking chair thinking about all the cool things I've done in my career so far. If I put you both in the same position, you're beside each other on a rocking chair at 103, thinking about all the cool things you've done in your career so far to date, what's maybe one story that would stand out to each of you that would be like, wow, I can't believe that's something I did for a living?
Man, one image that I had in my head whenever I worked in the actual league itself, that still sticks to me now is, years from now, somebody that we helped out, somebody that we served really, really well, inviting us over to their house and saying, hey, man, here's my wife. Here is, this great house that I have. Here is what I'm doing right now, something that I choose to do, not because I have to do, but I choose to do it because I took care of what my sport was able to afford me. And the reason why this is all possible is because of the tiny bit of a role that you played in this journey in my life. And I think that's what it's all about for me. If we can serve people well and we can look back at our lives and say, man, here's a culmination of different people that can say, hey, our lives are a lot better because Yves Parker Vestible was a part of it, then, that's a job well done to me.
Yeah, that's something So is this something that we've done right now or something that we will have done?
No, to date so far. So let's say, like, just looking back until where we are in 2024. Obviously, I'm hoping a bunch of incredible things happen to you guys in the next 50 years plus, but just to date so far.
Yeah, I think two things come to mind for me, and there's one that's vestable and there's one that's not. So I'll start with the one that's not. So I just, in all honesty, I feel very, very blessed to be where I am today, and it's really because of a lot of people who have given me the time of day for no reason other than they felt called to. And I think that one thing that I'll always cherish is that I've been in the room with billionaires that have been the most kind and incredibly giving people that I've ever seen. And I've been in the room with millionaires who are the worst version of that. That's something that's always going to stick with me, is keeping the pendulum on the side of grace and on the side of compassion, and knowing that nothing that we have, and this is a Christian belief that I have, like nothing that we have is really ours. It's really being good stewards. And so stewardship, I would say, is probably the first thing that I'll say. As far as Vestible specific, man, it's cool working with athletes. Like just to be honest with you, it's a lot of fun. It makes me feel like we're still in the game, if you will. But as of right now, probably the coolest thing that we've done is the partners that we're working with. And I think that I'm not going to share their names because that's not for us to share right now. But we're in the rooms with some of the biggest decision makers in the sport. And I think that that's a very, very huge accomplishment because that says two things. Number one, that says a lot about who Eve and I are as people, because those people don't spend time with people that are not of good character and of good integrity. So that makes me feel really good. And then number two, probably the second part of that, is that we're building something that matters. And I think that if we can always keep our eyes pointed at the fact that money's money, like I said, billions, been there, seen that, money's money. Impact is what's really important, and driving change is really important. And if we can look back and be like, we drove a lot of impact, hopefully it's a company that's helping a lot of lives and doing something cool and people want to be a part of it. Hopefully it's that. Maybe it's a blip on the radar. We really don't know. But at the end of the day, that to me is the thing I'm most proud of right now.
And Parker, you kind of were thinking to my last question here that I ask every guest is, obviously went to the future. Now if you go back to the past where maybe you're walking on campus for the first time, you take that time machine and go talk to a younger version of yourself. What's one piece of advice that you've learned so far that when you go talk to that 16, 17, 18-year-old version of yourself, what you'd be like, hey, little Eve, little Parker, this is something you need to know, right? Like this is something that I've learned that, I want you to take with you for the next couple of years, for the next remainder years of your life. What would that be?
Man, mine is, it's extremely personal to me. It goes all the way back to the root of my foundation and my faith. But it's, my life verse, essentially, right? Matthew 6:33 says, "But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added on to you," right? I won't lack anything that I need. I committed my life to walking that whenever I was 19 years old. I would go back and say, hey, do that sooner, right? I would say, go back to 13, 14-year-old Eve and start doing that then, because, man, there's a sense of peace that you gain that is inexplicable. There's a certain sense of confidence knowing that, hey, the creator of all things is actually, giving you a bunch of grace and has your back, right? That you get with all of that. And just those two things, that peace and that confidence, would have been able to save me from so many different headaches, especially as you're building this company and you're able to say like, man, I care so much about it. Like you want it to do so well and your emotions can be this and that. But, we've been in a place where we can stay steady. Because, luck is a gamble, but grace is an investment. Like you're backed by the creator of all things. And I think just knowing that allows me to say, hey, we're going to build this thing and we're going to build this thing out the right way. And, no matter what happens, we're good.
Yeah, I just building off what Eve said, it depends on it depends on where the time machine takes me, because if it takes me to when I'm 16 and when I'm 18, when I'm 22, like those, and when I'm 25, those are all very different versions of me. So it kind of depends. I think the number one thing that I learned very, very early, but still wish I would have known even earlier, because I would have probably been a very different athlete, was no one cares, work harder. Like, no one cares. Like whatever you're feeling, whatever you're down on, whatever you're, people's hardest, like a person's hardest thing they've ever done is the hardest thing they've ever done, right? And so no one really truly knows what you're marching through, what you're going through. It's just your version of that story and their version of their story. And I wish that someone just would have woken me up so much earlier and been like, hey, you know what? Quit complaining. Like, it doesn't matter. That person doesn't care. You can complain all day long, but it doesn't matter. It ain't going to change. Like, the only thing that can change is what you do today. I wish I would have known that a lot earlier. Second to that is my spiritual walk, and I mean we you can kind of tell, like Eve and I, this is who we are. We're unashamed about it. Eve actually said my life verse, Proverbs 16:9. Men can make a lot of plans, but the Lord directs their steps. Like that's 1,000% what I've lived my life by, especially since I started when I left the banking industry in 2018. And I wish I would have known that verse a whole lot earlier. The one thing from college, like, it's so funny, I'll tell you this story. The one thing from college that I regret more than anything is not going to the Bible study that some of our teammates had at that time. I wish I would have done it. I got asked a million times, Charlie Moore, Chucky, wherever you are, dude, you asked me so many weeks to go to freaking Bible study, and I should have done it. I'd have been a very different person very, very early, or much, much earlier. And I always had an excuse. Going back to the other thing, no one cares, work harder, right? Like, all these things are all connected. But man, Chucky Love, dude, I should have listened to you, man. Appreciate you, even today.
Yeah, well, that's perfect. That's exactly why I like asking that question at the very end, and I think it puts a nice bow on everything. So unless there's anything else you'd like to share, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and it's been great having you both on.